All right, there we go. We're all set. Okay, cool. So I'm here with Zach Baumer from the city's Office of Sustainability. And today we're going to talk about the Climate Equity Plan is the new name for it, right?
That's the new name, the Austin Climate Equity Plan.
Yeah, and this is something that's been in the works for a long time and was just released yesterday. Do you want to give kind of a high-level overview? What's this Climate Equity Plan?
Yeah. So the first community-focused climate plan was adopted by City Council 5 years ago. And so written into that plan was that every 5 years we should do a full revision update to that plan. So we started last summer, and then last August, September, and then really got going with plan participants and everybody really engaged last November. So it's been about an 11-month process of having everyone involved working together. We've had over just about 150 combined city plus community members, like co-creating and working together on creating this. We didn't have like a consultant facilitator or anything. I mean, it was just like Office of Sustainability staff, city staff, and then over 100 community members working together. Yeah, so we worked together over this really long time period. We did a lot of different public outreach things along the way. The way the plan was sort of set up is that we had a steering committee, and then we had 5 advisory groups, and so there are 5 portions to this plan. And yeah, this time around, the major, the focus of a plan like this is on reducing emissions. So how do we address climate change, mitigation wise, from the whole entire community. So not just the city. This is like how do all businesses, community members, everybody, how do we all fit in and collectively reduce emissions? And then the brand new focus this time around has been on equity, and how do we center racial equity at the heart of this process and make sure that it is included throughout the process.
Yeah, and so for folks who aren't as familiar with the climate plan, this is something that we already, this is like an update to our climate plan. So we started doing this when, 2015 or 2014? We released a first one.
Well, the first city action on climate change goes back to 2007. But in this type of planning effort, City Council adopted the target of net zero community-wide emissions by 2050. They set that target in 2014, and the initial process to create the initial plan was done in the 2014-15 timeframe. So add 5 years onto that, and this is sort of version 2.0 of that original plan.
Right. And when we say net zero community greenhouse gas emissions, that means, like you said, not just the city of Austin, but like me as an individual, all of us living here. And net zero is just saying pretty much no greenhouse gas emissions. Maybe we have to do some offsets, but in large part, in the end, we're not emitting greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, so net zero just means, the way that we've defined it in the plan is you get to at least 90% reduction of like the real emissions that are occurring, and that there will likely be some tiny 10% or less of emissions that's remaining, just because some things will like be impossible to replace.
Right.
You're exactly right that yes, it's all of the emissions. So when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions in Austin, emissions come primarily from burning fossil fuels. So burning coal and natural gas for electricity, and then burning gasoline and diesel in cars and trucks, and using natural gas in buildings to heat buildings. There's minor other emissions that come from industrial plants and refrigerant leakage and from landfills. But really the focus, when you think about you or I on a daily basis, it's the energy to keep our houses, keep the lights on, keep our houses cool, keep our houses warm. And then it's getting around from place to place. It's all the energy that's used in transportation. And those are really like the 2 biggest parts of this.
Yeah, and where we've seen, when I was looking at the plan, kind of noted that, we're doing really well in reducing our emissions in buildings, so to speak, so from energy really. because we own our own electric utility. And Austin Energy, there's been a lot of planning effort around reducing emissions there. But those are in some part being a little bit offset by our terrible transportation problems, where we're having more and more people live here and more people are driving. So that's kind of like seemed like a big focus of the plan is like, well, we need to stop ignoring transportation, I guess, in a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. And I think part of that from like the big picture is that you said it, that because we control Austin Energy, and because of technological advancements with large scale generation of renewable energy, Austin Energy has been very successful at decarbonizing their electricity through investing in wind and solar, in huge utility scale plants, as well as like local production. So, in the next 10 years, we're going to have almost zero emissions coming from electricity. But transportation, if we were to walk out on the street right now, there isn't very much public transportation. We are very sprawled and suburbanly sort of developed area. And almost 99% of the cars you see on the road right now are powered by gasoline and diesel, by fossil fuels. So, and the challenge with everything related to transportation is that the city has some levers and we have some areas of influence, but we don't have control. You can't just mandate, like make a change, or like make pass a big sweeping thing that makes all the emissions go away. So it really will take full community effort and community engagement to really have everyone like bought in and supporting it and taking action and participate.
Yeah, and then another big change that's in this plan. Before you said we had that goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. This plan kind of pushed that a bit and said by 2040. Can you talk a little bit about that decision, or kind of that what it means to make that goal a little more aggressive?
Yeah. Well, last August, the city council passed a climate emergency resolution, which many cities across the country passed, essentially just stating that we really are in an emergency state here with reducing emissions, because globally, emissions have not started to come down yet. So globally, like there are more and more emissions this year than there were last year. Even though Austin is reducing, like globally, we are not being successful on doing this. And so that climate emergency resolution was passed, and it asked staff to look at how can we make the goal more aggressive, just reanalyze that whole thing. So we spent a lot of time with the steering committee, and a lot of time with reports from the IPCC and the UNEP and and C40, which is a global group of cities that we collaborate with. And those reports essentially say that that every year that we don't reduce emissions, the goal needs to be steeper and it needs to be sooner. So you can't just delay if we're going to actually avoid the climate change. You just have to reduce more faster. And then the other thing that we analyzed all that and kind of applied these global trends and global goals like to the Austin goals and saw what they look like. And the other thing we took into account was from C40, there's this report called Deadline 2020, which talks about the relative income of cities and the relative emissions of cities. And Austin is a city that globally, we are very high income. Like per capita, we have very high incomes in the city. So we have the ability to take action. And then the other thing is that also globally, we are very high emitting. Every single house burning natural gas, every single house owning 2 cars. So we are a high emitter, high income city. And so essentially what they recommend is that for cities in that sort of category, that we should take on stronger and more bold and faster emission reductions than other places. Because if you're a low income place that already has low emissions, like you should not be expected to reduce emissions as fast.
Right.
So yeah, so kind of all that thinking went into that, and the steering committee has recommended that the goal be the steep decline goal, 0 emissions by 2040, and then actually try to go negative beyond 2040. So they are putting that up to city council, and that will be up to city council to make the decision whether they adopt that target. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other big component of this plan, like you mentioned, that's pretty markedly different, I think, than the last one is this focus on equity. This plan really is centered on that. Can you talk a little bit about the process to get there? Because I know that you worked pretty closely with the equity office and kind of had an equity scorecard or really integrated that into the plan. How did that work?
Yeah. So I would say that it started with the Joint Sustainability Committee, which is the commission that oversees the implementation of the climate plan. Started with them pushing us to focus on equity. And then the second thing was working directly with the equity office. You know, the equity office has been as part of the city for, I think, 3 years now. And has been working across city departments with trainings, with developing equity action plans. So we started working with them and trying to understand and unpack, if we were to center equity at the heart of this plan, what would that look like? So the first thing that we did was try to get a diverse set of participants. So that was the number one thing, is that we spent a lot of, there are a lot of people interested in climate change in Austin, but frankly, if we would have just taken the people who were standing at the front door, we would have had 100 high-income white people participating in this plan. So we had to make really distinct steps early on to find people of color, find Black and brown people in this community to stand up and trust us and to join as part of this plan and to help us center equity. So that was the first thing. Then the second thing, we really realized early on that just saying climate and equity, you know, last October, no one was on the same page about what that meant and specifically what we were talking about. So we hired a local community organizer, a guy named Dr. Tane Ward, and he helped us. We hired him and he came on and did, for all of our 140 plan participants, we did a full day, equity climate sort of Austin workshop, where we spent a whole day talking about the issues, talking about history, talking about environmental justice, talking about how these things really fit together. So that was essential for everyone to just get on the same page. And what came out of that were these 7 equity values, which are in the plan. They're things like health, affordability, accessibility, cultural preservation, those sort of things. And those are the areas where we really found that that's where equity and climate get addressed. They get addressed with issues that that matter to people on a day-to-day basis. And if you can have health and accessibility and clean air for everyone, that and it really is for everyone, that you can address climate change and address racial equity. So we took those values and created what we called an equity tool. We based it on, the Equity Office and this organization called GARE, Government Alliance for Race and Equity. We based it on their process, and it's just it's a 7-step questioning process where we created all of these backup questions based on the values. And how it ended up being used was that for all of our advisory groups, it was a guide and it was a conversation and it was getting everybody to dig deep and ask the hard questions about when we're proposing a goal or when you're proposing a certain action, really trying to peel it apart and think about the history and think about the data and think about how it could affect equity and try to modify all of our proposals to make sure that every single one of them addresses equity in some way, shape, or form. So that was sort of applied, and then all our advisory groups went through that process and ended up proposing what you see in the plan today. And what you see is a lot of centering low-income communities and communities of color in things like incentives, communications, engagement, not focusing on the most cost-effective thing, but focusing on the people who need it the most first. And trying to create that bigger benefit, because to a high-income person, saving $50, it's just $50. But to a low-income person, saving $50 is a big deal. So trying to create disproportionate maximum benefit for people is a key part of this. Other things in there are, trying to address anti-displacement and gentrification in the city, trying to address specifically health outcomes for people. And those are just a couple of examples. But oh, and the last one is I can't forget this one is green jobs and training and entrepreneurship. And as we switch from one type of economy based on one type of energy and move to all of these new things, making sure that that low-income communities and communities of color aren't left out, and that this isn't just like another power grab.
Yeah.
So that's a lot, and it's a lot to say, and it's a lot to digest. But like as we tell that story, and as people really, I think, get how these things are interconnected, you sort of can't. Once you've seen it, it's like hard to unsee.
Yeah, the centering of communities of color or lower income communities as well in this plan, I really noticed. I think that this is something that the environmental community has been, a little guilty of in the past. With a lot of these incentives, I know that there's been, even things like solar incentives, which, allow people to get solar panels on their roof. Great, we're lowering our emissions, but those are like a lot of city dollars that are flowing to people who like have the money to pay for, who own a home and have the money to put solar panels on the roof. And there's examples of that, over and over and over, because we're just trying to like, we're just in this rush of like, let's do anything we can to lower emissions without maybe thinking about the impact of that, or if those people might do it anyway.
Yeah. And that's really where, that I've really come to understand is that if we're not proactively trying to do something about this, the economic system that is set up perpetuates injustice. And that injustice flows against Black and brown people in this community, and it's not fair. And if there's any issue that anyone doesn't think has an equity component, they just haven't asked enough questions. Because once you start asking those questions and peeling back, any time that there's government or financial incentives involved in something, there is an equity component. Because the second that there's a interaction or connection with a rebate or a customer interaction, anything, if you're not thinking about race, and if you're not thinking about how do these things line up, it will be ignored and will be forgotten, and like we'll just perpetuate. So like it almost at every turn, I think for city government to really advance in this area, we have to be asking these questions across the organization. And while this is a really good start in the climate plan, like the city, well, I have a lot more to learn. This plan is going to have to get better. It's not perfect, and across the city organization, we're going to have to get better at asking a lot more of those questions.
Yeah. I want to take a minute to go through some of the sections of the plans as far as emission reduction. I thought maybe I could share my screen here. Let me pull up, see what I have. Equity. Summary document, yeah. Okay. So I wanted to just kind of touch base on the big like buckets of reduction. So we have here sustainable buildings is one. And so sustainable buildings in this, for people that might go through and look at this plan, sustainable buildings includes a lot of our energy production, right? In the past, maybe we would have labeled this as an energy category. I've seen it. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, because when you talk about buildings, the impact that they create is in the construction of the buildings, but it's really in the electricity, the natural gas, the water that's used in those buildings. So once you make a building, you hook it up, then the impact starts getting created. And we didn't want to, redo Austin Energy's targets. Austin Energy passed the generation plan. So we had to sort of figure out, how do we address this topic while leaving those issues alone? So you can see what we have here is new and existing buildings being net zero carbon. A brand new part of this plan is reducing emissions from refrigerant leakage.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. This came about, this really sort of came into the public understanding with the Paul Hawken book Drawdown. It was named as like one of the top, maybe the top, like most efficient way to reduce emissions. It's essentially the chemicals that make air conditioners, refrigerators, coolers, freezers, the chemicals that are inside of those refrigerant systems that make cooling, mechanical cooling possible. Those chemicals used to have ozone depleting characteristics. And then over the years, they sort of changed the chemistry to make them, because of the Montreal Protocol, make them not deplete the ozone layer. But now they still have global warming properties. So those chemicals, you know, if you've ever had your air conditioner topped off with refrigerant, you know, it's your air conditioner stops working because it's all leaked out. Every time those chemicals disappear and go to the atmosphere, those chemicals cause additional global warming, and each amount of those things is like multi thousands times more worse than just CO2. So this is a brand new area for this plan. What we're looking at here is trying to reduce leakage from like individuals as well as commercial applications. Because when you think about, you know, you could look at 100 houses and we all have these tiny air conditioners and tiny refrigerators, but just think about one HEV and how much air conditioning, how much cooling and freezing one commercial size place has. And there's massive amounts of leakage. So in this strategy, we're trying to figure out ways to partner with them to reduce leakage, to reduce the use of these the bad chemicals and use better chemicals. So yeah, it's an exciting new area.
Yeah. And then the other big one here is this all new buildings, and 25% of existing buildings are net zero carbon. So net zero carbon basically just means that in essence, this building isn't emitting. Yeah. So the energy it's powered by, but also does it include the building itself, like how the building was created or the materials that went into it?
No, at the top here, this is about the operation.
Okay, the operation.
So it's about using renewable energy. It's about either electrifying the building or using renewable natural gas or using no natural gas in a building. So you have no emissions in the operation of the building. The construction is down here at the bottom.
There we go.
Embodied carbon footprint of building materials. Because when you think about, you know, like wood was a tree, which is sequestered carbon, which goes in your house, and it is sort of sequestered carbon. But when you think about high rises or large scale construction, there's a lot of concrete and steel used, and there are different types of concrete and steel that you can use. There's different types of building materials. So trying to drive lower impact building materials that aren't just super high energy intensive building materials. Right.
And so with this, you know, I think in sustainable buildings, this is a big area when we talk about city incentives or how things have done in the past, like, and equity. You know, I think historically, like a lot of our green building programs, and it's starting to change, but have really been like, this is a beautiful high-end building that's very expensive and it has all the green features, right? And so I guess the intent here is to shift from that a little bit and to open up these kind of buildings to more people in the city.
Yeah, because, you know, the newest, nicest, most sustainable building will be good for your health and good for the environment. But if it's unaffordable, then like, what's the point? So we need to figure out how to make this affordable and accessible to everyone, so we all have access to safe, healthy buildings.
Yeah. And then the next category in here is transportation, which is a tricky one.
We have two on transportation. So the first part of it is the transportation and land use side.
Yeah.
So this is the idea here is around the first two goals are around density and trying to have interconnection in the development. And this area is complicated because the city, you know, there's the land development code situation at the city. There's affordable housing, strategic housing blueprint. There's already a lot of work going on here. So a lot of what this is trying to do is just reiterate and reinforce the importance of ensuring we have affordable housing, ensuring people can live in our city close to where they work and close to where they do things, because the equity and the climate impacts of that are huge. Because the more that we sprawl and the more that people are pushed out of our city, they live in larger houses further away and just have to use more fossil fuel transportation. So we're just trying to make, reiterate the really important climate angles of those conversations.
Right. And also I noticed in this plan, you also mentioned that we can't, even though this is just a City of Austin plan, obviously when we're thinking about the bigger picture of emissions, like we do live in a region and in a state, and if all we're doing is just pushing people outside of our technical borders and saying we've reduced emissions, like we haven't reduced, we haven't really done that much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other big piece of it, public transit, and kind of the way we get around is in here. So obviously Project Connect could have a big impact on this, which is the bond that's going to be, the initiative is going to be on the ballot in November. I think what's surprising
these last two goals, without, more investment in safe bike and walking ways in the city, and without Project Connect, we can't reach these targets. So right now, less than 1% of all of the distance traveled for all the trips is made on public transportation, and less than 1% of all the trips is walking and biking. So this is trying to get to 5% of total trips on public transit, which would take, a full build out of Project Connect and like full utilization of it. So having people, and I think the key equity benefit with this too is to make walking and biking in public transportation, making it safe and making it low cost and making it like timely and fast and like functional for people.
What's surprising to me here, and I think a lot of folks might be surprised, is like that our goal is just to get 5% of our trips to public transit or 4% to walking or biking. I think in our minds, or it's easy to be like, oh, well, we need 50, there's this conception, a little bit, a misconception that it's like, well, we need everyone to be riding their bike or everyone to be, but it seems like we could make a big emission reduction if we just got, just some percentage of the population that's how bad we are, I guess, with just all cars.
Yeah, it's mostly a reflection of just like people really understanding how far behind we are here.
And then this is the other transportation section, which is transportation electrification. And so this is a big goal here.
Yeah, so we recognize that that we're not going to get everybody out of cars, right? The way that the city, if you're living on the north side of Austin or outside of, it doesn't really matter where you are. Like the city of Austin has been designed and laid out. People own property in a very sprawled manner. And we realize that even we need to be massively successful with public transportation for a lot of reasons. But we realize that if we're going to get to zero emissions, we have got to get the emissions out of the rest of these cars and trucks. And though this was another area of the plan that was directed by City Council for us to address this. And, with Austin Energy getting closer and closer and closer to almost zero emissions coming through their electricity, in the next decade, if you can put renewable energy into a plug-in electric vehicle, then you're not creating any emissions upstream. You're not creating any local air pollution. You're not burning gasoline like in your neighborhood. So this is a big goal. The goal is within the next 10 years, try to get to 40% of all the total vehicle miles traveled on the road electrified, and do that in a way that's fair and equitable. Because right now, this is sort of it's a traditional kind of environmental thing, like the solar panels, is that most of the electric vehicles you see now are $50,000 plus dollar Teslas, which are owned by high-income white people, and it's not fair for everyone. So that's a big goal. And then the other two goals here around having charging stations readily accessible for everyone, having this not be you have to hunt for a charging station. We have electricity everywhere. I mean, essentially every house, every building, every workplace, like we have charging stations technically everywhere. So making all of that enabled with internet connectivity to make it all available for charging. Then the last one is in this section is connected back to what you talked about the regional nature of this, is that, even if we, use Austin Energy to get our customers to use electric vehicles, there are a lot of people commuting in from Williamson County and Hayes County and Bastrop County. And those are the people that actually have the worst commutes with the highest gas bills and the longest distances. So trying to really partner with those neighboring communities on, how could you own an electric vehicle in Williamson County and charge it, in Austin, and then be able to work sort of back and forth so people are fully enabled.
Yeah. And then so the last piece is here, we have natural systems. So this one is newer, I think, to the plan. And the idea here, so this is like actually sequestering carbon and making sure that we still have like natural spaces that obviously serve a lot of other benefits, but are helping us in our carbon efforts as well.
Yeah, in the first version of the plan, we did not address carbon sequestration. But the amount of carbon that's stored out there right now in the trees, in the soil, I mean, it's millions and millions of tons of carbon. So it's protecting the carbon that we have stored in all of the natural areas around us, and then doing everything that we can to enhance the sequestration, because every tree that grows, that's CO2 going into that tree. So natural systems can play a huge role from the carbon standpoint, but also, as you said, like the way that we typically think of natural systems is ecosystems and beautiful places to be and clean the air and clean the water. So this is kind of a double win here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's awesome. And then, before we close, I want to talk a little bit about implementation of the plan.
Yeah.
So,
well, there was one section that we left out: food and product consumption. But,
oh yeah, where was that? Is that next? Let me see.
Yeah, no, it was in there. But the food and product consumption section is really about. If you go back, I think no, it's up.
Yeah, it must be up. Oh, here. I guess I just
right
scrolled too fast. Yeah, food and products.
Yeah, food and products. The idea here is that Austin. This is a similar kind of Austin Energy situation where resource recovery has a master plan. They're revising that master plan, and they're very much focused on like end of life. What do we do with all of the stuff? So this new section is trying to think bigger picture than that, and trying to think more upstream and circular economy. So the idea here, the first action is around food. So increasing food security for everyone, and then really trying to focus on foods that are good for your health and good for the environment. And then the second one is around institutional purchasing, because the things like the city, UT, we have an outsized impact when we're spending writing $20 million checks for like large amounts of things. We can make a big impact there. And then the last one is really trying to support resource recovery in their master plan, but then also in like developing their circular economy programs and trying to just minimize and like get away from all of this, like, when your phone breaks, you throw it away, when your keyboard breaks, you throw it away. Trying to repair things and have a much more local circular economy, materials, jobs, all that.
Yeah, cool.
So thanks for going back to that.
No, I'm glad that we have this, because this is a newer one too, I think.
Yeah, this is new. Yeah, first time, in the first plan, we focused on, it was kind of the typical recycling and composting and all that, and this kind of takes it out a little.
And this is a good place too, where individual people really, I think, have a lot to say or interact with. It's like what we're eating and what we're throwing away. It feels, I think, like an area that is more manageable for an individual to impact. It's like, okay, this is like what I'm bringing into my house or what I'm serving my family. Like I have a little bit more control. It feels like a more manageable step to take, I think, for a lot of folks, as long as there's an ecosystem that's supporting it and making it affordable and such, and accessible, but it's possible.
Yep.
So
thanks for going through all that. It was good.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important for people to see it all, and when you look at all the components, I think then obviously the next question is, okay, well, how do we do any of this? And I know it's like a huge bite there, and a lot of the emission reduction that we're talking about in that to 2040, we want it to happen in the next 10 years. That's where the bulk of it is. So a plan like this, especially for people who aren't very familiar with city plans in general, like what do we do with this? How can we make these things actually come to life in some respects?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first thing is that this just sort of like sets the stage and it sets the vision and the direction for what we need to accomplish. And then obviously, when city council adopts the plan, they can support the plan financially. They can support it through supporting our departments and through directives to really drive our city resources to take action. After the adoption of this plan, I mean, my plan is that we will get, the next step will be like much more specific implementation plans for a lot of these actions that are things that the city can really take an outsized role in. The important thing this time around, though, a big lesson learned from the first plan was that when the first plan was adopted, we kind of left it up to city departments to take all the action. And while we did some amount of business and community engagement around it, there wasn't enough attention and enough funding. So what we're going to really aim for this time is to do everything that we can to try to get more dedicated funding, and then really try to focus on bringing community members and businesses into the implementation planning process, and really try to figure out how do we enable more action and action from individuals on their own and support people to take action, and not just have this be like a city only activity and implementation. It's going to take all, if we're creating all the emissions, it's going to take all of us collaborating and working together on this.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a place for also like our nonprofit community and such to take some ownership of and
absolutely
carve out some pieces that they can tackle. I think there are some orgs.
Yeah, I mean, a thing we've talked about with the steering committee is moving towards community ownership and accountability. Mm-hmm. So this isn't just a commission trying to hold Zach accountable for the climate plan. I mean, we need the community holding city council and holding all of us accountable for reaching these targets. Like, if we all really care about this, then we need to all be accountable for it.
Yeah. And our, as far as our mission so far, I think that one thing that people always ask is like feasibility a little bit. I mean, I think part of that is just like, I don't know, as a world, we haven't really like truly invested. Who knows what's feasible? Because I don't think we've like put the time and energy we could in it. But like in Austin, we have been reducing our emissions, right? Like we've been tracking this for a little while. Like we are at least on a path in the right direction, whereas other places I know are not.
Yeah, we are definitely on the right path.
Yeah.
But the challenge is that the path never ends, and we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go to get to the finish line. But yes, we have already been successful. And I don't think it's not a question of like, is this technically possible or technically feasible? It's a question of like, do we have the will, and are we willing to spend the money and take the action to actually create a better world? And it's going to take hard decisions by individuals as well as businesses and policymakers, like to try to make a more just and a more equitable society, because just the business as usual capitalism of just letting like the environmental solutions only be like the high income fancy thing, like that's just not going to work to get to the levels of true like engagement, ownership, and like results that we need. You can't only have solutions for 20% of the people if you're trying to get 100% of the emissions gone. Like, this has to work for everyone. And we have a lot of people of color in this community, a lot of low income people in this community that are being left behind, and like we have to stop that and have to like figure out how to support them too.
Yeah. And so for the plan right now, it's open for the public to comment on. So how do people learn more about the plan or give their feedback?
Yeah. So if you go to Speak Up Austin and you look up Community Climate Plan, you'll find there's a whole page. And then if you click through, you'll find those two documents, that document, and then there's a very long version with full explanation document on there. There's those two documents where you can review them. And then there are two places. There's a box where you can just enter in comments and thoughts that you have. And we will tally all those and collect all those and review all those. And then the other thing is we created a little survey that is like, if you don't want to go page by page or make a bunch of comments, if you just want to like give some reactions and like give your general thought in a simple survey kind of way, you can click through and answer the questions on the survey.
Okay, and that's like a 4-week comment period
yeah,
or
4
something.
weeks. So it'll be till the end of September. So basically the whole month of September, you can go to any time and do this. And then we will be tweaking and making revisions and finalization in early October. And then the hope is that this is, that it goes to City Council by the end of October. And and Council hopefully will support the new plan, and away we go.
Right, so this is like the big vision, and then after that, it'll be the nitty-gritty work of implementation.
Yep.
And then the one other thing that I did see in there that I wanted to ask you about is, it seemed like the steering committee was proposing like an environmental justice committee or something like that. Is that kind of like just some folks to keep an eye on it, or kind of have some ownership over the plan, or what's the idea behind that?
Yeah, so that recommendation is coming from the steering committee. It's not like a staff recommendation. Their recommendation is, a few years ago, there used to be a council committee called the Open Space Environment Sustainability Committee, which was a distinct place of council members that interacted on environmental topics. That council committee was canceled, or like they stopped it like 2 years ago or 4 years
they cut several committees, I think.
Yeah, they cut several committees, and that was the one that they cut. Yeah, because there was a time where like there were too many committees.
Right.
They cut them back, but the environment one disappeared. So the members of the steering committee are just advocating that should come back. And then the key recommendation is that it be focused on environmental justice. And so it wouldn't just be an environment committee, it would be focused on the intersection of environment and equity issues. So that's the idea. And just like you said, it just creates a place for more accountability and more visibility and more like connection on these issues.
Yeah. And so just before we close, I'm curious from you as someone who has worked on climate plans and this stuff for a while, what has been like most interesting or exciting to you about this new iteration? I think sometimes with climate stuff, especially if you're working on it for a long time, you kind of lull a little bit, it's just like, feels like you're just like up against a wall sometimes. But this effort has felt different to me. I'm curious if, what have you found most interesting or exciting about this latest plan? And
I mean, the technical things are interesting to me. The big goals on electric vehicles and sequestering hundreds of thousands of tons, from the atmosphere into our natural systems, like all of that stuff is cool to me. But the hardest work of this plan and the most important work is really building those relationships between the environmental community and the equity community, and really like being vulnerable in that process, and like thinking about my privilege and the city's privilege, and really like the realization that like this tent can be bigger, and that if we design this in a way that really the community supports and cares about, that we can have a much broader coalition of support for it, and feel better about that. I mean, and just feel better that like we're doing this for the right reasons. And trying to make a better world, not just a better environment for the environment, but a better environment for people, because that's what we're focused on, and not just people, but animals and and everything around us.
Right. Okay, great. Well, once again, people can then they can go on that Speak Up Austin page, and they have the whole month of September to take a look at it and give their comments. And thank you so much for taking your time and explaining it a bit and working on it.
Yeah, thanks
I
for
know it
Amy.
was a big project.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a big effort, but I really appreciate the time. Thank you for everybody who listened. Go to that Speak Up page, and we're excited to hear from you and move on.
All right, great.